Welcome back to the deep dive. If you are listening to this right now, you might want to find a comfortable spot and maybe dim the lights a little bit. Because today, we are really pulling our chairs up to the metaphorical campfire.
It definitely has that vibe today. It feels like we should be, roasting marshmallows while we talk about this one.
It really does, because we are looking at a text today that feels less like a strict philosophy lecture and, well, more like a ghost story, but one that just happens to explain the mechanics of the entire universe. We are doing a deep dive into session 224 of the Seth Material.
Right, and specifically, this is coming from the Early Sessions Book 5.
Exactly. Before we even crack the spine on this one, I need to make sure everyone listening knows the ground rules, because this is a really unique deep dive. This podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We're here to learn, to explore, and to get our minds blown just a little bit.
Or a lot.
Yeah, probably a lot. So let's set the scene first, because context is really everything with these sessions. The date of record is January 17, 1966. We were in Elmira, New York. We've got Jane Roberts and her husband, Rob, who Seth refers to as Rupert and Joseph, and they're just sitting in their front room.
And for anyone who is totally new to this material, it's a fairly typical session setup for them. But the atmosphere described in the source notes is really intimate and specific. The notes mention that Jane is smoking, she's just relaxing, and as she goes into the trance state to let the personality essence known as Seth come through, her physical demeanor actually changes.
Right, her eyes.
Yeah, her eyes are doing this thing where they're opening and closing, getting very dark. It is a very physical, visible transformation.
It's just such a mundane, domestic setting for something with such high strangeness. You have the cigarette smoke, the cold winter night outside in New York, and then this completely distinct voice coming through. And tonight, Rob has actually set up a test.
He has.
He's got this double-sealed envelope containing a wallet identification card that he found in an empty house they almost bought 2 years prior. So you have this mix of the scientific, or at least the investigative, right alongside the deeply mystical. But what actually comes out of Jane's mouth during this session is, it's radical.
It completely challenges everything we think we know about the arrow of time.
It really does. So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack 3 very specific, mind-bending assertions that Seth makes in this session. 1, time isn't linear. 2, you can and actively do change your own past, literally, not just symbolically. And 3, you might be reacting right now to a future that hasn't even happened yet.
And honestly, the absolute highlight for me is the story buried in the middle of the session, the York Beach incident. It is one of the most chilling things I've read in the entire material.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a story about doppelgangers, probable futures, and literally bumping into a version of yourself that you decided not to become.
It gave me absolute goosebumps when I read it. We will definitely get to that. But let's start where Seth starts. We have to lay the groundwork with the nature of reality and this whole idea of the malleable past.
Let's do it.
So Seth opens the session with a statement that seems to contradict basic physics, or at least our daily, lived experience of it. He says, quote, "The past and present are real to the same extent."
That is a very heavy opener.
It is, because intuitively we think the present is real because we can touch it.
Right.
We're in it.
Yeah.
The past is just gone. But Seth goes on to define what he actually means by real here. He says reality, as we experience it, consists of electromagnetic connections in the physical brain and the non-physical mind.
Right?
Okay, we need to stop and really unpack this. Electromagnetic connections, that sounds very technical for a channeled entity. What are we actually talking about here?
Think of it like data storage, but living, active data. We tend to view memory like a photograph stored in a dusty album up in the attic. You take the photo in 1995, you put it in the album, and it just stays there. It's unchanging. It might fade a bit, but the image is fixed.
Right, it's an artifact.
Exactly. But Seth is saying that is completely wrong. He's saying a memory is a live circuit. It is an active electromagnetic pattern in your neurology and your psyche. It's energy that is being held in a specific formation right now.
So it's not a file sitting on a hard drive somewhere.
No, it's much more like a melody being hummed continuously. If you stop humming, it disappears. But Seth's big twist here is that these connections aren't read-only.
Right. He says the past is no more objective, no more independent from the perceiver than is the present. This is such a crucial point. We tend to think of the past as a statue. It's carved in stone. Waterloo happened. I dropped my ice cream when I was 5. It's done.
Yeah, we think we can change how we feel about it, like you would in therapy, but we can't change the event itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Seth is saying, no, that's incorrect.
He really pushes the idea that the perceiver is always a participator.
A participator.
Yes, you don't just remember history, you recreate it. Every single time you pull up a memory, you are effectively re-recording the tape based on who you are right now. You aren't accessing a static file. You are running a program that generates the file anew each time.
I love the quote he uses to drive this home.
Yeah.
He says, "The past itself is being continually recreated by every individual as attitudes and associations change." And he emphasizes this next part, which I think is the most important distinction. He says, this is an actual recreation and not a symbolic one.
That distinction between symbolic and actual is doing all heavy lifting here. In psychology, we talk a lot about reframing. We say, oh, you're rewriting your narrative. But we mean that metaphorically. We mean you're changing your perspective on the cold, hard facts.
Right.
Seth is suggesting that the actual electromagnetic reality of the event, the literal energy signature of it in the universe, is being altered by your current state of consciousness.
He uses the metaphor of the child within to explain this, which is interesting because we hear that phrase a lot in pop psychology today. Heal your inner child. But it usually just means be nice to the part of you that was hurt back then.
Right. But Seth takes it so much further. He says the child within the man is not static. He says, as the man changes, the child within literally changes. So the 5-year-old you that exists in your psyche isn't just frozen in whatever year you were 5. That 5-year-old is evolving right alongside you.
That is just wild to think about. It implies this incredibly dynamic relationship with our own personal history. So if I become more confident today, the me of 10 years ago actually becomes less insecure in the past.
In terms of the electromagnetic reality that constitutes your existence, yes. Because the past is dependent on the future. The man influences the child just as much as the child influenced the man. It is a completely two-way street.
He actually brings up neurosis here, which I found totally fascinating.
What?
It's a very different take on mental health than the standard Freudian view we're used to.
It really is. He suggests that what we call severe neurosis often occurs when an individual fails to automatically change their past.
That is so counterintuitive. We usually think neurosis comes from lying about the past or repressing it. We think sanity is admitting, look, this bad thing happened, it's set in stone, and I just have to accept it. Seth seems to be saying that true mental health requires you to be an active editor of your backstory.
An active editor who doesn't get stuck, yes. Think about it this way. If you hold on to a traumatic event as a static, unchangeable thing that ruined you, you create a blockage. You stop the natural flow of these electromagnetic connections. Seth says the past is not something done and finished with. It is fluid.
Right.
If you treat it as rigid, you actually break the mechanism of your own psyche. You are trying to build a flowing, dynamic life on a frozen, dead foundation.
It reminds me of how when you learn a new piece of information about someone in your life, it instantly changes every single memory you have of them.
Precisely. That is the perfect example of this in action.
Like if you find out your best friend, who you thought was just ignoring you for years, was actually secretly protecting you from something dangerous, suddenly every single memory of them appearing distant instantly becomes a memory of them being protective. The actual texture of the past event changes completely.
And Soot would argue that's not just a mental trick. You have literally altered the reality of that relationship's history. You have rewired the circuit. You have changed the past event's resonance in the universe.
So if the past is fluid, and we are constantly rewriting it from the present, what does that say about cause and effect? Because if the effect, which is me today, can change the cause, which is me yesterday, we are in deep trouble with the standard laws of physics.
We certainly are.
Which perfectly leads us to the second section of this deep dive, the mechanics of the ripples.
This is where we get into the actual mechanics of how this works. Seth uses a very classic analogy here, but he completely flips it on its head. He talks about a stone thrown into a pond.
Right, he says, ripples from a thrown stone go out in all directions.
Okay, so picture a river first. We usually think of time as a river flowing one way downstream. You throw a stone, which is an action, and the ripples, the consequences, flow downstream into the future. That is standard causality.
Cause and effect.
Exactly. But Seth says, imagine a perfectly still pond instead. If you throw a stone in a still pond, the ripples go forward, but they also go backward. They go out in a complete circle in all directions.
Oh, an action I take right now sends a ripple back to yesterday.
Yes. Every single action in the present changes the past. Seth admits he is going out on a limb here, even for him. He says the boundaries between past, present, and future are total illusions caused by the limits of our physical perception. We are trapped in a biological linear view, so we only see the forward-moving ripples. We are completely blind to the backward ones.
But the backward-moving ripples are just as real.
Just as real. And this is where the concept gets really trippy. He says, it is possible to react in the past to an event that has not yet occurred.
Wait, let's pause and really look at that sentence. Reacting in the past to an event that hasn't happened yet.
It means you might be influenced right now by your own future.
Are we talking about something like a premonition or déjà vu?
It is much more fundamental than that. It's not just catching a glimpse of the future. It's the future actively exerting a gravitational pull on the present moment. Imagine you suddenly get a weird urge to cancel a trip. You don't know why. You just feel off about it, so you cancel it. 2 days later, there is a massive, unprecedented storm exactly where you were going.
Okay, yeah, that's a standard intuition scenario.
But Seth would explain the mechanics of it differently. He would say the future event, the storm, occurred in the overall field of time. It sent a ripple back in time, a backward-moving ripple. You, sitting in the past relative to that storm, felt that ripple, and you reacted to it.
So the future event actually caused the past action.
Exactly. It is a causal loop. The future event directly influenced the present decision.
This honestly breaks my brain a little bit. It makes you question every gut feeling you've ever had in your entire life.
It should. It suggests that we are not just being pushed from behind by our history, which is the standard scientific deterministic view. We are also being actively pulled forward by our potential futures. We are caught in a web of time. We are not just walking a straight line.
And this brings us to the absolute highlight of this session for me. Because Seth doesn't just leave this as some dry, abstract theory about ripples in a pond. He tells a story. The York Beach incident.
The doppelgangers. This is the campfire part of the deep dive. This is where the hair on your arms is going to stand up.
The story gave me the chills. Can you walk us through exactly what happened?
So Seth brings this specific incident up to explain the concept of probabilities. He references an event that happened to Jane and Rob at the Driftwood Hotel in York Beach, Maine. This was back in August of 1963. Now remember, this was before the Seth sessions even started. They weren't channeling yet. They were just a normal couple, an artist and a writer, on a summer vacation.
Right. Just completely normal people out for a night on the town.
They are on the dance floor. It's a crowded room. The music is playing. And they suddenly see a couple dancing very close to them. And this couple bears a remarkable physical resemblance to Jane and Rob.
And when he says resemblance, he doesn't just mean, oh, they sort of look like us from a distance.
No, it was uncannily close, like uncanny valley close. They looked like them, they moved like them, they had the exact same vibe. It was striking enough that they both noticed it immediately, stared at them, and remembered it vividly years later. It wasn't just, oh, that guy has your haircut. It was a visceral feeling of, that is us.
And Seth explains what this actually was, and he makes it clear it wasn't just a bizarre coincidence.
No. He says that couple was a psychic projection of a probable future.
A probable future, meaning what exactly in this context?
Seth says, quite literally, you could have become what they were. That couple represented a distinct... or we're just slightly different people emotionally.
It is a literal sliding doors moment. They're standing there looking at the road not taken, and it's physically dancing right next to them.
It is. But here is the paradox, and this is the part that keeps me up at night. Seth says that because they perceived this probable future, because they saw these doppelgangers and reacted to them in the present moment, the transformation did not occur.
Whoa. So just seeing the future prevented it from happening.
In this specific case, yes. By bumping into that probability on the dance floor, they objectified it. They put it out there, outside of themselves. They reacted to it. Maybe they subconsciously thought the couple looked a bit tacky or just strange, or they felt a disconnect. That internal reaction steered them away from actualizing that specific timeline.
They avoided a specific future simply by meeting it ahead of time.
Exactly. They collapsed the wave function, to borrow a quantum physics term, but by observing it externally as a separate entity, they ensured they wouldn't inhabit it internally.
That is just haunting. It really makes you wonder how many times you have walked past a stranger on the street who looked vaguely familiar, or you felt this weird flash of recognition, not realizing it was a version of you that you just decided not to become.
It suggests the world is so much more crowded with different versions of us than we realize. We are constantly brushing up against the ghosts of what we could be. We are navigating this massive sea of probabilities, and usually we just do it completely blindly.
Seth goes on to talk about why we don't notice this more often. Because if this is happening all the time, why aren't we seeing our own doubles everywhere we go? He brings up the role of the ego here.
Ah, yes. The ego as the ultimate gatekeeper.
I really love how he characterizes the ego in this section. It's not the villain exactly, but it's like a very grumpy bureaucrat.
A highly stressed out middle manager.
Yeah.
Seth says we react to future events constantly on a subconscious level. Our inner self knows exactly what is coming. The inner self sees all the ripples. But the ego finds this information completely distracting and annoying.
Distracting and annoying. I love that phrasing. It's like the ego is sitting at a desk saying, I'm trying to file these reports in strict chronological order. Please stop showing me next week's mail.
It really is. The ego's main job is to maintain the illusion of linear time so we can actually function in the physical world. Imagine if you were consciously aware of every single probable future and every single ripple from the past all at once. You couldn't even focus enough to tie your shoes. You would be completely paralyzed by the multiverse. So the ego simply shreds the files.
Seth says when forced to admit their validity, the ego will resort to the most far-fetched rationalizations.
Right. It says, oh, that was just a wild coincidence. Oh, I just had a weird feeling from something I ate. Oh, that person just happened to look a little bit like me. The ego works overtime to keep the narrative straight and linear.
It's almost like the ego is gaslighting us just to keep us sane.
In a way, yes, it is. It screens out the spoilers so we can play the game of life chronologically. It protects the integrity of the linear experience, even if that experience is ultimately just a biological illusion.
But the inner self, that is a totally different story. The part of us that isn't the ego.
The inner self isn't playing by those physical rules at all. And this brings us to the core distinction Seth makes between the ego and the inner self regarding time.
He explicitly says the inner self is not imprisoned by time.
No, it's not. He actually references J.W. Dunn here, a philosopher of time who wrote An Experiment with Time. Dunn had this whole idea of serial time. But Seth says the inner self is even more capable than Dunn imagined. The inner self can perceive events occurring well after physical death.
Because if time is truly simultaneous, death is just another event in the field. It's not the end of the field itself.
Exactly. To the inner self, your birth and your death are just 2 points on a very large map, and it can see the whole map from above. It can see events it's not even involved in. It has a completely panoramic view. But, and this is a huge but, Seth strongly emphasizes uncertainty and free will here.
Right. He says no event is destined to occur.
That is the real empowerment in this philosophy. Even if the inner self sees a probable future, like a car accident or winning the lottery, it is not fixed. It can always be changed.
He says it could be changed before, during, or after its occurrence.
There is that word after again, changing the past. It all loops right back to that core concept.
He does give one pretty grim but important example of a limitation here, though. He talks about the murder victim.
Yes, because people read this and start thinking, oh, I can do anything then. I can jump off a building and change the past so I fly. Seth is very grounded in the physical mechanics of the system we are in. He says if a man is murdered, he cannot return to physical life whole and intact in the same system.
Because he has been permanently removed from the playing field.
Right. The biological instrument is broken beyond repair. The consciousness has left the physical system. However, the murderer is still in the system.
So the murderer can still change the past.
The murderer can change the electromagnetic connections regarding that specific event. They can change the meaning, the karma, the psychic weight of it. They can alter the reality of the act within their own psyche, but they cannot undo the physical death in this specific timeline because the other player has left the board.
Seth does mention reincarnation here as a brief side note, that the victim can return to the system that way. But it is a really good reminder that while reality is malleable, there are hard physical laws we are currently operating under. We aren't gods without limits. We are creators operating within a specific, rule-bound system.
Exactly. We are playing a game with specific rules, even if our consciousness ultimately transcends them.
Okay, so we have got the deep philosophy down. We've got the spooky campfire story. But usually in these sessions, especially these early ones, Rob tries to test Seth. He wants tangible proof. He's the resident skeptic in the room.
The parlor games, as some people call them, but they are fascinating because they bridge that gap between high-level metaphysics and gritty physical reality. It is one thing to sit there and say time is an illusion. It is another thing entirely to prove you can see inside a sealed envelope.
So let's look at the envelope tests from this session.
Uh-huh.
This is where the rubber really meets the road.
Right. So, transitioning from the nature of time, Seth agrees to do these tests. The first one Rob presents is for a doctor in the stream.
And Seth starts visualizing. He sees a gold ring, an outdoor party, a river, some Gothic buildings.
And he mentions the names Avon or Stratford.
This one seemed a bit vague compared to what comes next, didn't it?
It was a bit muddy. Seth notes that Dr. Instream does not feel up to par. And he explains that often the clarity of the telepathic transmission depends heavily on the recipient's energy levels. It's actually interesting to see Seth struggle or be a bit impressionistic here. It adds a layer of credibility, in a strange way. If he was just faking it, he could have confidently made up anything. But he's interpreting raw images he is receiving, and sometimes the signal is just weak.
But then we get to Rob's envelope, the wallet ID card. This is the item Rob found in that empty house 2 full years prior.
This is where it gets incredibly specific. Rob hands Jane, who is actively channeling Seth, the sealed double envelope. Inside is the ID card. Nobody in the world knows what's in there but Rob.
And Seth just starts firing off impressions.
He says flowers, the odor of flowers as if it is summertime.
And the validation for that.
Jane had actually spent a weekend weeding the flower garden at that exact empty house in June of 1964. So Seth is picking up on the lingering memory associated with the location where the object was found.
Okay, that is a solid hit. Then he says tumult, meaning noise.
Rob validates this one immediately in his notes. He says one of the primary reasons they decided not to buy that house was the traffic noise. It rolled right up the hill and was unexpectedly loud.
So Seth picks up on the exact reason they rejected the location associated with the object. He's not just reading the text on the card, he is reading the psychic history around it.
Yes, he is reading the emotional resonance attached to the place and the object.
Then we get a very visual hit, he says, a black and white photo.
Seth says the card was carried next to a black and white photo, and Rob confirms this entirely. In the physical wallet where he originally found the card, it was tucked right next to a photograph.
That is highly specific. That's not a metaphor or a vague feeling.
No, that is classic remote viewing. That is seeing the physical history of the object across time and space.
And then, the totally random one, stubbing of the toe.
I love this one. Rob confirms it is a long-standing family joke regarding his brother. It seems completely disconnected from the ID card or the house.
So why on earth did Seth mention it?
Seth explains that he picks up on stray radio waves from the sitters' minds. Rob might have just had that thought floating in his subconscious, or it was just nearby in the mental atmosphere of the room.
It's like tuning an old radio and catching a tiny snippet of a comedy show through the static while you're looking for the news broadcast.
Exactly. It perfectly shows the messy reality of telepathy. It is not a clean, direct text message. It is a cloud of associations and overlapping frequencies.
And there's one more very specific connection mentioned here, the Frank Watts thing.
Oh, right. Before Seth even showed up, Jane and Rob contacted a different personality named Frank Watts via the Ouija board.
And Rob had recently found an old newspaper clipping from 20 years prior about a Richard Watts. He was privately curious if there was a family relation there.
He didn't even ask the question out loud during the session, right?
No, he didn't. He mentioned it to Jane casually before the session began, but he didn't ask Seth. But Seth just brings it up spontaneously during the trance. He clarifies that Richard was a distant cousin of Frank Watts.
Validating the connection, but actively correcting the specific details of the identity.
It just shows that Seth is constantly monitoring their curiosity. He answers the questions they are thinking, not just the ones they vocalize.
It really demonstrates the profound level of connection Seth has with them. He is fully plugged into their mental switchboard.
So putting this all together, we have a session that starts with the fundamental physics of time, moves to a literal ghost story about probable futures on a dance floor, and ends with a practical demonstration of seeing across space and time to identify a hidden object.
It is a complete tour de force. It ties the abstract theory directly to the physical practice. It says, here is how the universe actually works, and here is me proving it by reading the history of this envelope you're holding.
So what does this all mean for us, for the listener tuning in right now? Most of us aren't mediums. We aren't channeling entities in our living rooms. How do we actually use this information?
I think the ultimate core takeaway here is agency. Yes. If the past is a fixed, immutable thing, you are essentially a victim of it. You are the direct result of things that happen to you. You are just a leaf blowing in the wind of your own history. But if Seth is right, and the past is actually a series of electromagnetic connections that you are actively recreating right now in the present, then you are the author.
You're not just reading the book of your life. You're editing the previous chapters as you write the next one.
Exactly. You can go back and change the tone, change the emphasis, change the literal energy of your past. And regarding the future, the York Beach story tells us that absolutely nothing is inevitable. We are constantly navigating a vast sea of probabilities.
That sliding doors moment. We might be bumping into our own probable futures every single day without realizing it.
And our reaction to them in the present determines which path we ultimately take. If we react to a probable future with fear, we might manifest one specific timeline. If we react with curiosity or joy, we manifest a completely different one.
It is a lot to process. It puts a massive amount of responsibility back on us.
It does. It completely transforms mindfulness from just a simple relaxation technique into a powerful tool for reality creation. Being present isn't just about feeling calm. It's about consciously choosing which future you are pulling into the present and which past you are cementing behind you.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us perfectly to our final provocative thought for the listener.
Let's hear it.
If ripples go in all directions, exactly like Seth says, what are you doing today that is currently rewriting your memory of 10 years ago?
That is a really good question to sit with.
And conversely, what future version of you is exerting a subtle, invisible pressure on you right now? Is that random anxiety you feel actually a warning sent back from a future self? Or is that sudden, unexplained burst of inspiration, a high five from a future you who already succeeded?
That is a fascinating way to look at intuition, not as some mystical magic, but as direct communication from your own probable future. A signal sent back from the road ahead.
It makes you want to listen just a little bit closer to yourself, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Well, we have unpacked a tremendous amount today, but as always, we are just barely scratching the surface here. This was a deep dive into just one single session, session 224. There are volumes upon volumes of this stuff.
And we really encourage you to go directly to the source. Don't just take our word for it, read it yourself.
Absolutely. The source material is the Seth Material, published by the New Awareness Network.
You can find the books, including the early sessions, which we discussed today, at sethcenter.com/the early sessions. There is literally a lifetime of study awaiting there.
And honestly, reading it yourself is a completely different experience. It carries a certain energy that we can describe here, but we can't fully replicate.
Agreed. It is something you really have to experience directly for yourself.
So go study, go explore the material, and until next time, keep watching out for those ripples. You never know when or from when they are coming.
See you in the future, or maybe the past.
Take care, everyone.